Violent media is the modern contemporary of the Roman Colosseum, bread and circus, cheap depictions of violence and excitement meant to calm, control, and distract the masses from the daily grind.
All you do is kill, kill, kill. God, they want a butcher, they want a hero. We want them to keep coming back. So don't just hack them to pieces. Remember, you are an entertainer.
We literally go to the movies and eat popcorn as we watch heroes and villains slaughter each other, faces and heels pummel each other in arenas for our amusement, ghetto girls beat one another, folks get into boxing over stupid stuff in the streets.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
We eat that shit up without question. We don't think about the consequences, the victims, or the perpetrators until it's one of us.
I can't believe they did us like that.
Wait a second. This got real heavy real quick. This script was not meant to judge you for liking violence on screen. I'd be a major hypocrite if I said that. This video is just supposed to be an examination of violence on screen. Sorry about the harsh intro. Violence is an important storytelling tool that, in most cases, should hold a lot of weight because violence in the real world holds a lot of weight. So the question becomes, how is it that some media can cause us to indulge in and actively seek out violence like a train wreck in slow motion, whereas others cause us to cringe and look away in disgust? Is violence inherently bad? What factors contribute to how we interpret violence? Does it make us bad people to seek it out and enjoy its depiction? Does it matter who perpetrates the violence and who is the victim? Violence is committed by and against protagonists, villains, and bystanders, with each one having its own implications. Violence becomes especially complicated when the perpetrators or victims in question are of a minority group. Depictions of violence usually change with the genre in question, with each genre typically having its own tone for violence. Lights, camera, action. It goes without saying that action media doesn't exist without violence. Action media calls us to enter a mind frame in which we often sympathize with the perpetrators of violence rather than the victims. Most action media does this by implying that even if our hero is bad, these other guys are worse. Most action movies are popcorn flicks. Rarely does the genre attempt to actually say anything meaningful about the act of violence itself beyond justifying an eye for an eye.
You killed him. Why? That's what they want from us. Follow the rules, you lose. Choose violence, you win.
Antagonists do something wrong and the heroes retaliate, thus giving them the moral high ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
By making the protagonist reactive to violence rather than proactive, the heroes are given the moral high ground, and rarely are protagonists ever seen doing something morally compromising, such as harming bystanders or animals.
I've killed an entire species.
They would have done the same to us.
No! They waited. What were they waiting for?
Who cares? We lost 1,000 men on the transporters you abandoned.
I abandoned them in order to win!
Yes! And they died proudly for us!
They might not have died at all.
Minorities are a bit more complicated. Depending on the era of the movie, the typical villains will likely be whoever the American public sees as the most prominent threat and where it is set, but are still almost always male. That being said, media has to be kind of careful about who ends up on the other side of that gun barrel, because no one bats an eye when some white man shoots up a bunch of other white men by the dozen, but turn all those white male goons into black women, and well, your movie just became a lot more interesting for sure, but also a lot more controversial. Cracked did a couple of excellent videos about movies that are totally different if you change the genders or races of certain characters, and Wisecrack did one on the eras of movie villains. Action heroes are almost always seen as in the right, which makes any acts of violence committed by them acceptable. They almost never allow bystanders to come to harm, and are even less likely to commit these acts themselves lest they be reduced to anti-hero or worse. They mow down legions of bald white guys and faceless goons with no consideration of their families and loved ones, and they look damn good doing it. They may take a few hits here and there, but don't worry, it's just a flesh wound. These guys and gals are rarely seen in any real danger. You'll often find that if the initial act of violence is against a loved one of the protagonist, it will likely be the most gruesome act of violence you'll see. Any violence that the protagonist commits in retaliation is then seen as justified and usually not as grim, unless the movie is R-rated and the hero is the spiteful type. Assassins, hitmen, and spies are crazy popular in this genre. These killers for hire paint our screens black, white, and red all over. They love what they do best, but what they do best isn't very nice. We seem to love it though. One-man armies that wipe out legions of guards in pursuit of high-priority targets, these people aren't us. The middle class, the office workers, the guy in the drive-thru. No, not the car in the drive-thru, the guy in the drive-thru. Average Joes, nobodies. At least nobody important enough to hire a hit on. It's like we aren't important enough to bother killing, despite being easy targets. It almost seems like the graph of haters and success show a strong correlation.
I can't wait for niggas to start hating. I can't wait.
So you judge your success by the amount of ill will you generate from those around you.
Hey, if niggas ain't mad at you, then you doing something wrong.
By that definition, then, you have a very bright future.
Thanks, man.
The higher up you climb on the social ladder, the more people who want to see your downfall. Some movies seem unnecessarily violent, as if adding more violence didn't actually add anything of value and instead distract it from its other aspects. Others depict violence and simply neglect the bloody consequences altogether. Others still edit out the violence to appeal to wider audiences at the expense of their tone and weight.
Nothing like toning down an adult series for the kids.
A rare few find ways to, in a sense, mimic violence or display violence in a way that doesn't offend common sensibilities.
No, there is no escape.
Violence against the protagonist usually just results in a flesh wound. Very rarely do we ever actually fear that they will die or that their lives are in any real danger. The heroes typically kill quickly to move on to the next dozen guys headed their way, using their superior skill, strength, ingenuity, or weaponry to overcome their enemies, but often take their time in dealing with the antagonist. Sometimes it's personal. Sometimes they just want to know why. Regardless, these movies almost always end with villain monologues and the hero taking the time to give them a suitable send-off in the form of poetic justice.
Huh. Plan A taught you the 5-point palm exploding heart technique.
Of course he did.
Antagonists often use violence as a means to an end. They use it to portray their power and status, scare their subordinates back in line, and kill those who would stand in the way of their goals, no matter who they may be. Men, women, children, or others. For most villains, violence is treated as the primary and most effective means of problem solving. Need to keep someone quiet? Off them in secret. Got a group of rebels looking for a change of government? Blow up their planet. Their attempts to use a more premeditated form of violence on those that they have some personal quarrel with, i.e. the protagonist, usually result in the hero being tied up in some weird trap before ultimately escaping and saving the day. In essence, making the villain the one to save the day by means of sparing the protagonist when they should have killed them in the first place. Sometimes the protagonists may find themselves on the wrong end of the law, and therefore forced to take violent action against civil servants, police, and the military. This is rarely portrayed as tragic or anything, but often does gain a bit more weight. Often they will attempt to avoid doing any real harm to these people to keep themselves in the audience's good graces. For the bad guys, however, cops and the military are easy pickings. The people who protect us are fair game. These people are usually incompetent, and just like the heroes, the villains cut through swaths of faceless soldiers that go down by the dozens with barely a fight. This lets us know that the bad guys mean business. Violence committed by these protectors is usually against bad guys. At best, they may be somewhat competent, but they're rarely great at their jobs. They're rarely seen committing these acts against minorities for fear that they would look bad and lose their heroic status. At least in most modern movies. But oftentimes still, the bad guys are made up of groups of minorities or foreign people with little to no characterization to justify the use of excessive force. This was especially true in older action movies that were produced during the times in which the US had clearly defined enemies. Again, Wisecrack did an excellent video on that. Violence against animals is almost always seen as worse than the violence against people. Something about seeing the villain kick the dog just makes you want to see them get their comeuppance. Harming animals is an easy way to get the audience to hate a character because we haven't been desensitized to it. It still shocks us because we rarely see it, and animals are seen as pure beings that get entangled in our conflicts by proxy.
And I like this dog.
Protagonists always respect animals. Sad to say, the idea that animals' lives are worth more than people is prominent in real life as well, with documentaries such as Don't F with Cats drawing near mainstream attention to the fact that internet culture values the lives of cats more than people. Violence committed by animals is just carnal and brutal. Animals don't care about looking cool, they care about ruthless efficiency in the kill. They're usually stealthy, large, strong, great in number, or all of the above. Animals tug at the primal fear that we have of the natural world around us. Strip away your house and your guns and your orderly society, and it's just you and the elements. If the animals feel any fear at all, it only makes them more terrifying. Violence committed by inhuman creatures and monsters is over the top in order to dehumanize them and show just how carnal and animalistic they really are. This takes away any feelings of remorse we may have for the protagonist killing them in the end. These beings have the features of predatory animals to the nth degree. They stalk in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. They are the stuff of our literal nightmares. They have supernatural powers, or sometimes even advanced technology that makes them virtually unstoppable. Rarely, these creatures are shown to be sympathetic, drawing attention to their humanizing characteristics and giving their deaths more weight.
I was happy, floating, staring at the stars.
Violence committed against inhuman creatures and monsters is always seen as justified. These creatures are beings of pure evil, literal hellspawn that must be stopped at all cost. They don't feel fear or regret, and they don't show mercy. They're stronger and faster than us and don't speak our language or share in our agendas, so there can be no compromise or understanding of their motives.
How could you? It trusted me!
David, I met the devil when I was a child, and I've never forgotten him. So, David, you're gonna tell me exactly what's going on, or I am going to seriously fuck up your perfect composure.
War movies. The depiction of violence in war is always taken seriously. The violence tends to lean toward the more realistic and gruesome end of the spectrum as to better depict reality and the horrors of war. This is the genre that is most likely to display violence against civilians and bystanders because of the nature of the genre itself. War is hell, and the best way to get us to see that is by making us the victims. Those people who are just in the wrong place at the wrong time, those who are the group being persecuted by the antagonist, or just those caught in the crossfire. The characters are typically loyal, handsome young men with their whole lives ahead of them who we feel don't deserve to die. They're sent out to the front lines with the morbid understanding that they almost certainly won't make it back. God forbid they start talking about the girl waiting for them back home. If they mention a kid, they got about 20 minutes before they're hit with the shell. In the most horrific of these scenes, these men are mowed down by the hundreds in gruesome displays of firepower. These techniques are so common because they are an easy way to build the audience's sympathy for the characters. Like I mentioned previously, the villains are typically minorities and foreigners of some kind, but in the sense of war movies, it wouldn't make sense to do it any other way because the protagonists are usually Americans fighting in real wars. That being said, it wouldn't hurt to see a movie that displayed war from both sides or humanized the foreign enemy combatants.
We were helping.
What? Oh no.
Are those civilians? Where'd they come from? There's no camp here.
They took them from the nest.
That hotel back at the storm wall? No, those can't be the civvies that got kidnapped. It's not possible.
Yeah, it is. That's why Gould stormed this place. He didn't want the king. He was trying to rescue his people.
This is your fault, goddammit! Stop right there, Hugo. Sometimes these aliens are literal, which blends depictions of violence against inhuman creatures and faceless goons into one. The ones that look like us, though, may actually turn out to be the good guys, and even end up defeating us in the end. In this sense, these movies often bring to memory real acts in history for better or worse. These movies attempt to make the aliens heroes and justifies their violence against us. A lot of the sci-fi war movies in which the aliens look like us call to mind American colonization. The humans show up looking to claim not an abundance of different resources, but often just a single, super expensive, extremely rare resource that does practically anything you want it to.
Their damn village happens to be resting on the richest unobtainium deposit within 200 clicks in any direction. I mean, look at all that cheddar.
But because these stories are woke, they have the natives win, with the help of a white savior. By switching sides and engaging in the culture of the oppressed, he is redeemed and uses his knowledge of the other's tactics to overcome them and be fully embraced as one of their people. This is even somewhat true of Black Panther. Horror media. Horror media typically causes us to sympathize with the victims of violence, more or less. Horror movies often lack meaningful characterization for the victims because they intend to throw them into the meat grinder. This is especially true in slashers. These movies depict characters as dumb and possessed by fear and horror itself. They trip over things, lose their weapons, run into traps, split up, and literally freeze up. Like, we don't see ourselves in these people because we're not that dumb, or we would have done the thing that they failed to do. They deserved it if they let that happen. We wouldn't have tripped on that branch running full speed in a panic state in total darkness in the middle of the woods. If you ever played a horror game and died, you're a hypocrite. Also, I dare you to run through dense woods at midnight at top speed. Whereas slashers and other horror subgenres typically have the protagonist leave home to go somewhere unsafe, home invasions bring the threat to us. These people invade our safe spaces and get us while we sleep next to our husbands and wives. Now that it's us, the victims aren't stupid horny teens. They're grown men and more often women. This calls to mind the last girl trope. The last girl is exactly what it says on the tin. They are the last and only girl to survive being attacked by a crazed psycho or supernatural creature. They are always female and a virgin. This implies that being a horny teen is sinful and deserving of a gruesome fate, whereas the last girl is seen as pure and worthy of life for keeping her virginity. Some movies such as Scream and Cabin in the Woods satirize the last girl in various ways. The weapons of horror are typically close range and prey on idiocy, unpreparedness, and making mistakes. Kills are more personal, bloody, and gruesome. Action movies tend to make kills quick and satisfying so that our plot-armored hero can make his way past countless goons. They use a variety of weapons, but most set in modern day use a combination of guns and fist fighting to make them look cooler. Wounds in horror lean towards realism rather than visual appeal to give viewers that extra squick factor when blood starts pooling out of the body. It looks painful, horrific, and hopefully real. The cameras will spend a lot more time on the injury itself and the effect it has on the person to communicate that they are hurt and weakened, and probably about to die. Action heroes just ignore the pain entirely. Minorities in horror movies used to always get the short end of the stick. If they aren't the villain, then they are guaranteed to die first.
It's not it, man. It's just the black guy always dies. Think about it, man. Unforgiven, Alien, Rocky IV, The Shining. And what about that brother in Jurassic Park, man?
Well, that was cool. There was 2 black guys who died in that one. That was a twofer. You must be really pissed off at that one.
I'm telling you, man, the black guy always dies first.
I don't think I have to tell you that this is the result of generations of racism in America. More recently...
But now the pendulum is swung back. Black is in fashion.
With relatively low-budget horror movies like Get Out gaining mass appeal and winning Oscars, and excellent series such as Lovecraft Country, Hollywood has begun to empower black characters in horror. Directors such as Jordan Peele and the creative team behind Lovecraft Country have been making power moves to support the black agenda in the horror genre and changing the game with movies like Get Out, Us, Candyman, and series like Lovecraft Country.
Why is it that as people of color we're always having to stand for something in our work? Just the cartoonist.
Because the world's a racist place.
Get Out stars a lone black man surviving an onslaught of racist white people and makes timely commentary about the state of racial affairs in America. Us stars a black family and comments on the economic divide between whites and minorities. Candyman, well, I didn't actually see the new Candyman, but even the old Candyman is timely, so I bet this new one is too. Lovecraft Country adapts a book of the same name, which uses elements of Lovecraftian horror, named after the genre's founder, to explore the history of racism in America and empower the black leads. Writer Howard Lovecraft was a notorious xenophobe, which was reflected in his work. The series flips the script on Lovecraft's depictions of blacks and foreigners as violent cultists by making the white antagonists the perpetrators instead. Comedy. Violence and comedy have always gone hand in hand. Violence and comedy hits that guilty pleasure center of our brain. We love to see people get hurt, whether physically or mentally. Heck, that's what this whole video is about. Comedy even has a name for physical violence when it's used for a laugh. Slapstick. Looney Tunes, The Three Stooges, Tom and Jerry, etc. Sometimes you just can't beat hitting a guy real hard with a frying pan. Slapstick is extremely common in kids' media because it doesn't usually result in any permanent wounds, even if we understand that these hits should be fatal. On the darker end of the spectrum, blood and gore can also be played for laughs. These films are usually coupled with slapstick and nihilistic characters who have shown little to no value for human life. The most common place to see this is in action comedies. In Men in Black, blowing a guy's head clean off his body is funny because it's not lethal and it's against a non-human entity. Regenerating heads also make for really great slapstick. Deadpool is immune to all kinds of damage, so violence against him is always played for laugh, and he jokes about committing acts of violence against others. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. Black comedies? No. That's not a black comedy. This is a black comedy.
Are you fucking crazy, man? You're gonna cut off your pinky for $15,000? That's a finger. It's not like it's gone forever. Even if it cost me $6,000 to sew it back on, that's still $9,000 more dollars than when I woke up this morning.
Black comedy is a genre referring to media that comicalizes pain, suffering, and taboo topics. These films are typical in their use of violence for a laugh. They make the actual act of human suffering funny, even if it's the suffering of characters that we've come to care about. Thriller/drama. In thrillers and drama, violence is always taken seriously because everything is taken seriously. Honestly, there's a lot to say and yet nothing at all. The violence in thrillers and drama is thrilling and dramatic. All of it is played for shock value, and there are always consequences. The depictions are almost always more realistic in order to draw out the shock factor. This genre is also the most likely to really explore the consequences of violence. Violent acts committed by and against minorities, animals, children, police, etc. are extremely common. Everyone can get it. These hands are rated E for everyone. This genre covers all the bases without fail, and best believe that if somebody commits an act of violence, it will be coming back to haunt them, and maybe their loved ones too. Something else worth talking about that is emphasized in the genre is how they get viewers to sympathize with perpetrators of violence against victims who may or may not have deserved it. Gritty crime thrillers such as Breaking Bad, Dexter, The Sopranos, and even anime like Death Note. These series stage their villainous protagonists as people to root for rather than against. Their ideals and issues are presented to us beforehand, and we are shown that they don't take pleasure in these acts of violence or don't do so easily. And at the very least, they feel justified. Well, Walt didn't kill that kid, so he's still alright in my book, you'll say. They're doing it for their families, you'll say. They only kill other bad guys, so it's fine, right? That's what you say, but you clearly forget that the title is Breaking Bad. He had to break bad at some point. These acts of violence occur every day in the real world, but I don't see any sympathy for, that guy. That guy and or organization that just came to mind when I was talking about sympathy for bad guys in real life. That gruesome killing you heard about on the news? Yeah, that's the one you just thought about. Not so fun now, is it? This is a potential real-world problem. There has recently been a push to recognize the victims of serial killers rather than the killers themselves. This is because even in real life, people who commit acts of violence are idolized and adored.
I get very scared, but, he's also really dreamy.
These serial killers have fangirls that send them mail weekly. They are seen as too handsome and charming to go to jail. The public often ignores those lives that have been taken too soon in favor of true crime stories that make life just a little bit more interesting. Violence in adaptation. In movies, shows, etc. that have been adapted from other media, we often find that the degree of violence is altered significantly. This is especially prevalent in the new wave of satirical superhero fiction. Kick-Ass 2 removes scenes depicting sexual violence and violence against animals in favor of jokes directed at the source material in order to garner more mainstream appeal.
It's time to see what evil dick feels like. Shit.
What's wrong? What are you doing? Come on. God, okay, I'm not in the mood.
I guess evil dick feels limp.
As a reader of the Invincible comic, I knew beforehand how violent the series could get in the later chapters. That's not to say that there weren't moments of ultra-violence peppered throughout, but it didn't become a mainstay until the later chapters. The series goes out of its way to make Omni-Man a menace. It does a great job of making every hidden wound painful to look at. It subverts typical superhero content by making even the gods crumple like men. Another trend that plays with this idea can be seen in remakes of old properties. This is especially true of animated series because the hiatuses allow the shows to grow with their audience. The newest iteration of He-Man realizes that violence was only implied in the previous iterations. Skeletor even notes when He-Man finally decides to use his sword the way it was intended to be used.
You finally used that sword the way it was meant to be used, boy.
Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, while never being violent, has more scenes of action and genuine danger as well as realistic depictions of firearms. Voltron Legendary Defender never becomes especially violent, but never shies away from the implications or consequences of war and violence. Characters don't hesitate to use potentially lethal force and finish the fight when need be. The same is true of The Legend of Korra, Ben 10 Ultimate Alien, and Thundercats 2011. Hey, hold on, I'm gonna rant about this one real quick. Thundercats 2011 is the greatest iteration of the series, hands down. It was cancelled after one season because of toy sales or something like Young Justice. Even though Young Justice managed to be revived, I don't think a revival is likely for Thundercats, but let it be known that I would commit acts of violence if I thought it would bring back my beloved. Anyway, the show is a notable step up in the violence department without overdoing it for its target audience. Samurai Jack's 5th season came out nearly 10 years after the series' standard run. In that time, the audience had gotten 10 years older, but they never forgot about old Jack. When the series came back, they had to consider how the audience had changed. The series was set in the future, partially as a means to depict ultra-violence while maintaining the proper ratings. The violence was depicted typically only against robots and androids, replacing blood and gore with oil and bolts. The 5th season, however, embraced the previously implied violence with a sense of maturity. Rather than just have Jack become a killing machine, he has to deal with the moral and mental aspects of committing acts of violence against another being. He has to come to terms with his actions and make peace with himself in order to continue his mission.
Your choices have clearly led you here, as have mine. I will give you a new choice. Leave here now and live, or stay and face your destiny.
Our destiny is your death!
Desensitization. Those of us who enjoy a hearty serving of violence in the media that we consume have been desensitized to varying degrees. We have accepted the idea that depicting violence is okay or sometimes even necessary or preferable. I don't know what this says about us as people, but it does raise some interesting questions. At what point do we stop caring? Why do we revel in the onslaught of red shirts and faceless goons? Is it because it's on a screen? Is it because it isn't real? Because it's far-fetched? Because it isn't perpetrated against people or animals that we care about? Action media is the one in which it is the easiest to become desensitized to acts of violence. This is because acts of violence on the protagonist's part are almost always justified. The sheer amount of violence takes away from its dramatic appeal, and going into an action movie, the viewers know what they're in for, so they get into a mindset that allows for violence. Hyperviolence is a term used to refer to violence that is particularly exaggerated to the point of being almost comical. This is typically done by taking everything that results from violence up to 11. Blood no longer just flows out from the wound, now it gushes out like a geyser at 60 miles an hour. Limbs go flying, People are ripped apart to the point of being unrecognizable. Most of the characters either revel in the violence or don't think twice about it. This kind of violence isn't taken as seriously as more realistic depictions. This level of violence makes it easier for us to be desensitized because we recognize that it isn't real. Ever since the original Mortal Kombat made its debut on home consoles, parents have feared that their children would become desensitized to violence and turn into violent psychopaths. There are tons of documentaries and research studies you can find on the topic, but it's been proven time and time again that violent video games, or any media for that matter, does not make people more prone to violence or even desensitize them from real violence. Often those on the opposing end of the issue will look at rare cases in which people committed violent acts and noted video games, books, or movies as their inspiration, but the research shows that these individuals are rare cases and obviously don't represent all of us. In conclusion, violence is a useful and powerful tool for writers. It can add or detract from a story at large. It can be played for laughs, dramatic effect, and even just the rule of cool. The way that violence is portrayed often depends on the genre in which it is being presented. Depending on who the perpetrators and victims are, violent actions can take on entirely new meaning for better or worse. The most important thing is that we understand that violence is an extremely versatile storytelling tool and use it effectively to tell the stories that we intend to tell or communicate the ideas we feel audiences need to know. Thanks for watching my video, everybody. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any ideas for what you want to hear me make videos about in the future, just let me know in the comments below. I read all the comments. Make sure to tell all your friends. I'm actually thinking of making this into a series, the Violence Matters collection, in which I explore violence across different media, genres, movies, TV shows, things like that. I've got some others planned. Like, I definitely intend to do one for the new Suicide Squad movie. I almost included that stuff in this script, but this one was getting way too long, so I had to cut it out. But I'm going to do it for superhero movies, some specific movies, just all types of stuff, because I'm a big action fan. It's my favorite genre, and I think that the way that we use violence is just such an important storytelling tool, and I feel like I have a lot to say about it. So again, thanks for watching my video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.